Well, we heard in our scripture this morning about counting the cost, about thinking about what it takes to do something, to build something. And I think that we do spend a lot of time in our lives counting and weighing the cost of our choices, so much so that I wonder if we even really notice it. We do it when we choose to buy one thing over another. We do it when we consider how many times to hit the snooze button in the morning. Maybe asking the question, do I really need all that time to get ready? Anybody can relate to that with me? We do it when trying to get someplace, sometimes factoring in traffic, sometimes choosing to let go of the reality that one little incident can add 20 minutes to our commute. And I don't know about you, but I definitely find myself counting the cost when it comes to things like getting a carload of items, especially groceries, into the house. I live by the theory that if it takes more than one trip, it's not worth doing. Tell that to the giant mess when the grocery bag breaks, right? Well, there are many times that we are called upon to count the cost of our decision. We are free to make choices, but we're not free of the consequences of those choices. And sometimes that is more difficult than if we couldn't choose at all. Well, Jesus invites us into this conversation in a really difficult way this morning. Whoever comes to me and does not hate father and mother, wife and children, brothers and sisters, yes, even life itself, cannot be my disciple. Whoever does not carry the cross and follow me cannot be my disciple. Now, those are harsh words that we have translated into English. Are we to hate our family? Now, again, as always, things are lost in translation, and really, it probably doesn't mean the word hate as we see it, but maybe love a little bit less, or put in a different position. Many of us, when we hear this, probably look around at the people who are sitting near us saying, well, I don't want to hate you. As one professor, Mincy Smith, said in our text this week, Jesus tells the traveling crowds, which might be composed mostly of poor peasants and freed or enslaved women and men, that they must hate their close family members and develop a hatred for life itself. This hatred is synonymous with the metaphor of bearing the cross as Jesus' disciple. If the crowds were poor, she says, they are likely despised because of and blamed for their poverty. And if they're wealthy, they might be reviled for building their wealth on the backs of enslaved peoples and the masses. And within their respective communities, they have likely been encouraged to distrust and despise each other, their peers and their neighbors. Listen to that again. They were encouraged to distrust and despise people, their peers, and their neighbors. Isn't that how society continues to be constructed? That's not just a first century issue. We demand loyalty, sometimes blind loyalty, without responsibility. Stick to our own kind. Hate the people we hate. Say what we want you to say. See what we want you to see. Get in line and know your place in the system. If you're not with me, you're against me. We often completely ignore the fact that someone close to us might actually be wrong about something like this. But we are willing in our families and our spheres of influence, our government, to rewrite history to prove that we are right. We throw around our power without carefully counting the cost of our actions. And that leads down a dangerous road to ideas that hurt, to supremacy, to believing lies as truth. And when we do that, we aren't counting the cost. We aren't factoring in the damage we do to each other. And more than that, we're not taking seriously the call to discipleship. We're not calculating the weight of God's grace and the expansiveness of God's love. Because all we have to do is look around at who Jesus was talking to, who he spent his time with, and who he challenged. And we see that perhaps our narrow lines of family need to be widened. Certainly doing so will lead to division among the people who demand loyalty. Certainly it will cause conflict with those in our lives who refuse to see the damage their own choices cause. This is no easy task. And that is why Jesus invites us to calculate the cost of being his disciple. Being a disciple is not about leaving it all here on Sunday morning. It's about taking it with you. It's about transformation here that leads to transformation out there. It's about walking out these doors and going into the streets and crying out for justice, and then doing the things that lead to justice for everyone, not just those close to us. It's about being a disciple all the time, not just here. About giving. It's not about just giving what is left over. It's about committing to the choices that we make to follow Jesus. And it's about considering what we leave behind for those who come after us. And that, my friends, isn't an easy thing to consider, because it is easier just to focus on us, on what we need. We easily become self-focused, I think, and want things our way. And the church is a great example of this. We get set in our ways sometimes of doing things and think that because it's always been like this, it should stay the same. But that only takes into account our needs and the needs of those who, not the needs of those who come after us. That takes into account the organization of the past and not the organization of the future, the church of the past and not the church of tomorrow, of right now even. But if we really believe what Jesus says, and if we carefully calculate the cost to remain the same rather than looking at new and innovative and spirit-led ways of doing things, we might be willing to allow ourselves to be shaped into something new. And it also invites us to look at things from a position of abundance, not of scarcity, because we often do that, don't we? We worry that we don't have enough, that we aren't enough, that we can't accomplish things. And I think that when we do that, it kind of leads us to be a bit stubborn, because doing things from a place of hope rather than a place of despair really does take some courage. But that is so much easier said than done. Now, I love the application of that idea to our Jeremiah passage this morning. Jeremiah receives instructions to enter the potter's house, where he sees the potter working at the wheel, shaping that vessel. But the vessel that the potter was crafting became misshapen. And so the potter reworked that clay into another pot that was smooth and rightly shaped. I love that idea when we start with one thing and it turns into something completely different, when we are willing to see that maybe we are rigid in our thinking. And maybe there's a huge blessing for us if we will just allow it to happen. This, Jeremiah is told, is a metaphor for God's relationship with the people. The potter may work to shape the pot, but the people have a choice. The clay may simply just resist. I love that idea. It works with the clay, but it also works with anything that we do with our hands. Can anybody relate to that when it comes to crafting or baking or woodworking or gardening? Sometimes we feel like we have control, and often that's not true when the medium just isn't cooperating. The Potter's Wheel passage is a part of a number of warnings against destruction, and you heard that today, the ruin of the people if they don't change. And we read these passages, and we look to our understanding of God, and we might see doom and gloom. God doesn't change, right? We sometimes think that a view of God as a being that moves with humans makes God less powerful. We might even see that idea as blasphemous. But there is another angle here. It invites us to look at God as a relational being, a being in covenant with us, not some puppet master pulling strings, but one who is in relationship. As I was studying for this sermon this week, I stumbled upon a great commentary by someone that many of us know here, the Reverend Dr. Melissa Ramos. Remember her? She speaks of this passage saying, in the midst of these prophecies of coming destruction, there's a note of hope that is plainly stated in Jeremiah 18:8. God declares that if a nation turns away from evil, which I've proclaimed over it, then I will change my mind about the disaster which I intended to bring. And while there's a wide range of meaning on this, but the idea of relenting, of having compassion, of comforting, or to be grieved, to be sorry about something, that's really what we're holding here as we read this about how God acts. In this chapter from Jeremiah, the force of this verb, Ramos says, is clear in that it's meaning that God would change the course of action in response to a change in behavior from the people. The specific sins of Judah and Jerusalem that are mentioned in Jeremiah are the worship of other gods and gaining wealth through unjust and oppressive means. These two accusations of guilt are intertwined. For example, Jeremiah 5 accuses Judah of becoming rich by taking the goods of others, of failing to care for those who are economically and socially vulnerable in their society, such as orphans and the poor. And since covenant law makes specific provisions for care of these individuals, abandoning the God of Israel to worship other gods really meant abandoning the laws of the covenant that were intended for community and individual flourishing. And so living according to the law of God involves economic well-being of those of the community as an issue of moral integrity. And so the encouragement here is for the people to see the darkness of remaining the same, of not looking out for those in need, is hurtful to God, and invites them to return to God. If this happens, we will all be condemned. But if we change our ways, we will all flourish. The prophet here is urging in this invitation to avert disaster so that goodness may come and blessings may rain down on them. It is an invitation to count the cost of not behaving in a way that all can flourish, of not behaving in a way where we look at how things have been and make them better for us, which means they're better for all. But again, this does require that we take seriously what it means to be a disciple, that we really look at that we really look at the places where we might be too stubborn to be shaped into people who fight for justice, to be shaped into people who offer hope when there is none, to be shaped into people who are courageous with how we care for not just those around us, but even beyond. It calls for us to count the cost of what it means to go beyond ourselves, to examine what would be lost if we don't choose to follow Jesus, if we don't choose to do justice, if we don't choose that radical love. Friends, we count the cost in many, many ways every day. I invite us to look at the ways that we do that really do bring about justice and love, and really do change our world. That's what we are called to today and every single day. May it be so.